Councillor Deirdre Kelly is my name and I'm deputising here today on behalf of the Mayor of the County, Councillor Joe Carroll. I'm delighted to be here on Heritage Week. Heritage Week is hugely important to the Council and we're delighted to provide funding in relation to different activities all around West Cork. I'm delighted that such a monumental architectural piece has been discovered here in Baltimore, and I'm delighted to be part of it, and I'm looking forward to listening to the talks and the demonstrations later on this afternoon.
I'm delighted to welcome Deirdre Kelly here, representing Cork County Council and the Lord Mayor, the County Lord Mayor, Joe Carroll, to open up this event for us as part of National Heritage Week. So Deirdre, if you'd like to come and join us. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Chris. Good afternoon, everybody. It's lovely to see such a big crowd on a windy, cold Sunday afternoon. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon with all of you. The history of the Baltimore Ringfort, combined with the sheer size of the site and its surrounding landscape, is simply fascinating. I was speaking to Chris and Colin just previously, and it's incredible that this Ringfort was, should say, rediscovered during the lockdown, and I would like to commend the Baltimore Ringfort Committee for all they have achieved since then. I suppose firstly in raising awareness in relation to the Ringfort, and secondly in making it more accessible to the community. Cork County Council is delighted to support today's event, which is a unique opportunity to gain an insight into life at a time when the Baltimore Ringfort was occupied, through the wonderful interactive demonstrations of traditional foods and crafts we will see today. Last year, Council contributed to an archaeological impact assessment of the site by providing funding through the Community Monuments Fund. Funding like this is crucial for providing opportunities to discover the true history of our beautiful county. Allowing people to understand their hometowns gives them a deep sense of connection to the area and provides a greater appreciation of our land. Cork County Council is proud to provide funding for today's event through our Heritage Grant Scheme. This is one of 150 Heritage Week activities taking place throughout the county this week, and this event definitely fits in with this year's theme of exploring the ways in which we are connected. I wish to thank archaeologist Phoebe Olson and artist Sonia Caldwell for organising the guided tour and interesting walk earlier this afternoon. And I think it's safe to say that everyone leaving this event today will have gained some new and interesting information about the Baltimore Ringfort. I'm looking forward to hearing the esteemed keynote speaker of the event, Dr. Rihanna Doolan. I am intrigued about the food of medieval Ireland and how it differs or compares to the food we consume today. Sonia Caldwell's interactive demonstrations sound most interesting, and I encourage everyone here today to get involved in this unique opportunity to discover traditional crafts. Now, without further delay, let the rest of the event proceed, and enjoy your evening, everybody. Thank you again. Thank you.
So now for the main event, the key speaker. We're delighted to welcome Dr. Rihanna Doolan from UCC to talk to us today about food in the medieval Ireland. So I just want to read out a bio for Dr. Doolan to start with. Having completed archaeology and Celtic civilization in 2022 in UCC, she worked as an archaeologist for 6 years. Then went back and did an MA in early and medieval Irish, focusing on the Brehon Law tract on milling and waterways, titled Kinship of Conducted Water, and then followed that with a PhD in arts, again from UCC, which was concentrated on the extant medieval legal material surviving on arson, encompassing the law tract, judgments on arson. And since then, you've been working as a programme coordinator in UCC for the part-time evening courses, including the Diploma in Heritage and Folklore Studies and the Certificate in Mythology with Adult Continuing Education in UCC. So I'm delighted to welcome you to talk about food in medieval Ireland, the role of food in defining social connections and in supporting networks of influence. Thank you.
Thank you very much to the committee for inviting me here today. I'm really privileged to be able to talk to you about food in medieval Ireland. As you were saying, I have an expertise or a background in Brehon laws in particular. So with that in mind, for today's talk, I've really taken back an awful lot of the content that I'm going to have to the Brehon laws and the Brehon law sources. So I might use some Irish terms. I do have translations, but sometimes they don't quite make a huge amount of sense in English. They don't flow nicely off the tongue. But there's plenty of secondary sources and discursive sources as well about food. So really what I'm going to give you is just a bare bones tip of the iceberg information about the sources that we have for food in relation to the Brehon laws. There's tons of material out there if you do wish to look at more material. So an example would be for Fergus Kelly. He has 2 books called, one is a Guide to Early Irish Law and the other one is Early Irish Farming, which I have to say I mind heavily for today's talk in particular. But there's also dedicated journals to food, lots of researchers. My colleague Regina Sexton is a very well-known food historian. She has programs in UCC on food and postgraduate programs. And even she teaches a module on the diploma in heritage and folklore studies as well with me. So there is tons and tons of material out there. And for example, the Royal Irish Academy bring out a journal every year. One of them is called the Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy. Journal C, Section C, back in 2015 even gave a dedicated journal to food all throughout the prehistoric and historic periods. So there's tons and tons and tons of material, which I'll be honest, I'm barely even going to scrape the surface off today. So as I said, I've brought it back to the Brehon laws a lot. I've brought it back to the sources, so the information that we have about it. So we have time for questions afterwards as well, so any questions would be more than welcome. So I get on with it now. When we're talking about the Brehon laws, we're really talking about sources from the early medieval period. The medieval period itself is usually classified as, or the early medieval period is usually classified as the time period between 400 AD and 1200 AD, and then the later medieval period going up to a debatable, there's a debate about dates, but usually in or around the dissolution of the monasteries in the 16th century. So the materials that we have that survive in manuscripts from post-1100 onwards in the Irish language manuscripts. We've manuscripts that are earlier, but they're in Latin. So all the information that we have survives in material in manuscripts that are newer, but what they do is they copy and recopy the materials. So we have manuscripts that are maybe from the 14th century, but the language that they are copied, the texts inside them are from much earlier, from as early as in or around the 7th century. The Brehon laws themselves, the core, the original tracts are mostly dated to between 650 and 750 AD, some a little bit later as well. But there's a huge concentration in or around the 7th century, a huge collection of them. We're very, very lucky. We have tons of information of them, unfortunately. Some of them are lost to time, but we have snippets of information from them as well. So a lot of the sources that I'm drawing on are from that 7th century, 8th century time period. And as I said, I'll be referring to primarily those texts throughout. Now, if we talk about medieval Ireland, or early medieval Ireland, in the 1950s, a man called Daniel A. Binchy described Ireland at that time as medieval, as a tribal, rural, hierarchical and familiar. And what he meant about that was tribal in that it was under each territory was under the rule of a king. It was hierarchical because there was grades of status, and I'll come back to that in a second. It was rural because we didn't have cities, we didn't even have towns. There was small nucleated settlements, but it really wasn't. It was really mostly people living in the countryside. You know, most people were farming or had aspects of farming. There were definitely craftspeople who specialised, but they probably would have grown a certain amount of food themselves. And it's also familiar, as in the family was at the core of every unit. So the family, or the fine, as it's known in medieval Irish, was really at the core of quite a lot of activities, and even in the law texts as well. Now, when we're talking about the hierarchical structure, we have this kind of pyramid structure here, where up at the top you have the nevid, or the nobles. Now, that would have consisted of the king at the top, and then these varying grades of nobles as well. So the status and the structure of society was really stratified. You know, everybody knew their place, everybody knew their rank. Their rank determined quite a lot about their freedoms, or their ability to create contracts or make a contract with another person. Entitlements, for example, if they were injured, all depended on their status. And we had three broad sections: the nobles, or the nobility. We then had the commoners, or the freemen, and then the unfree and the slaves. Now, because sources and tales are most often written about the people who are most interested in hearing about themselves, we have a lot more information about the nobility and even the commoners than we would have about the unfree or the slaves or enslaved people. So it is something with this talk that I'm mostly going to do a compare and contrast when I do that between the commoners and the nobles. For our sake, I'm going to refer to two terms for the freemen. That's the boara and the ogra. Now, these are both farmers. The boara has quite a lot of land. He's a more prosperous farmer, whereas the ogra is a less prosperous, or has less land available to him. But they're both farmers. The nobility, they define themselves by their wealth, their status at birth, and also something called clients, which they have relationships that they enter into. Now, I'm going to come back to that later on, but it's they're defining their status by, or their nobility is defined by their actions, by their birth, by their wealth, whereas the farmers are being defined by the amount of land that they have, or the amount of wealth that they have. So just in terms of that breakdown between the societies. When we talk about the nobility, like the nobles are divided up into multiple grades, subgrades as well. The lowest grade is what's known as an aradeso, or a lord of vassalry. So I'll be talking about that lord later. Now, he appears on the bottom layer of the kind of the nobility. So he does, if we're talking about this triangle, he's just above my white line at the nevid. So yes, he's just, he's noble, but he's in reality probably not that much more wealthy than the richest farmers or richest boara. But status-wise, he's definitely of higher status. Now, when we're talking about medieval houses, this is a lovely image that I got from your website. I really enjoyed it. It was really, because it has the palisade and the ditch, and we also have the couple of houses as well. And we have another one that is also, this is a beautiful representation, and we also have some examples from UCD of a reconstruction as well. This is done by the UCD archaeology unit. So it is, and these photographs are from Aidan O'Sullivan. And so traditionally in a ring fort, what we have is an enclosing area surrounded usually by a circular bank and ditch. And then there could be multiple enclosures within. Usually one would be a house or a habitation place, and then there could be 2 or 3 other structures that may not have much evidence surviving from them, and they could have been cattle pens, for example. Because Ireland is a rural society at this time, we don't tend to find a huge amount of crops or anything like that grown within the medieval enclosures. You might find maybe a little bit of a herb garden. There certainly is some evidence for that, and I think there's some archaeological evidence in particular at some of the different ring forts around medieval Ireland. So whenever you get to excavate your own ring fort here in Baltimore, you might be able to contribute to that question of how much food might have been grown there. But in general, what we have in medieval Ireland is a mixture of arable and farm and husbandry in this society. It tends to have been a balanced diet. It tends to have been according to the seasons. There's very little, there's some processes for storing food, but a lot of it is seasonal, so the diet depends on what's available. It is completely in tune with what is available to you each week, each month, each season. So staples would have been bread, because you can store grain, milk and milk products as well, because we have quite a long period where we can milk cows. And then also, of course, vegetables, fruits, all depending on their seasonal nature. Quite often the sources refer to extra products such as condiments such as herbs, cabbages, seaweed. Butter features very, very frequently, and I know you're going to have a demonstration later on. And then all the other milk products as well that you can get from it, so not just milk, but anything that you can make from milk too. Salted meat also gets referred to quite frequently as well within the sources, and sometimes onions and seaweed as well. There's a tale called Aisling Con Glynna, The Vision of Mac Con Glynna. It's kind of a satire, 12th century satire tale, and it's all about the food, and it's a description of a person wearing salted bacon shoes at one point. But all throughout that tale, it frequently refers to kale, curly kale cabbage, in one of the translations, and I have never craved kale so much in my life as when I read that. So definitely it's one of those kind of recurring features of the food. In terms of animals in medieval Ireland, cows are the most important animal that we have. Status was calculated on cows, your wealth was defined by cows. Cows were a unit of currency. Really, really, really important in medieval Ireland. So they're not just being used in terms of the food products that we can gain from them, or even the meat that we can gain from them, but they're an actual definition of wealth. So they are, the more prosperous you are, the more cattle you have. In terms of the byproducts, so from cows we can have things like milk, beef, the marrow, the blood, hide, tallows, for candles, bones and horn pins, we can make combs, bone needles, spindle whorls, and then of course don't forget the dung as well for fertilizer. So anything that they can use from an animal, they will use. In the law texts themselves, they state that the price or the value of cows or cattle is often quite static. Now, that wouldn't have been so in reality. For example, if you have a year where there might have been a plague that affected a lot of the cows, and we know from the annals, the historical records that recount year on year the major events of the years, they regularly record that cows would have suffered from plagues. So the year after a cattle plague, you can guarantee that those cattle are worth a lot more. So they are, because they're rarer, because there's a lack of them within the community. But if we take it as static for what they are, this is a table that I've taken from Fergus Kelly's Guide to Early Irish Farming. And it just gives the different grades of cows and their relative worth. The most important kind of equation when we're looking at it for medieval Ireland and what wealth is worth is this equation here of an ounce of silver is 24 scruples. So 1/24 of an ounce of silver as 1 scruple. 1 ounce of silver is equal to 1 milch cow, and 3 milch cows is equal to 1 covel. The milch cow is the most important, most valuable animal that you can have in terms of cows. That is because you're not only getting the, you have a calf that has been produced, you're also getting the milk products. So a 3-year-old milch cow is really, really, really important in value. So I'm just going to very quickly just talk a little bit about this particular table where we have the very young calf. So for example, a just born new calf, that would be with its mother. So it doesn't have a separate value, it's because it would be with its mother in time. So therefore the value is assumed to include, of the mother is included. Then you could have an older calf worth, and it's divided up. It can be for like a female calf versus a male. It can depend, so usually the males are worth about 2/3 of the females. You can have then yearling bullocks, yearling heifers, 2-year-old bullocks, 2-year-old heifers, 3-year-old males, and usually don't have a value stated. Fergus Kelly actually suggests that it could be that at this point most 3-year-old males would have been slaughtered at this stage, that there would be very few that would be kept at that point. And you then have the differentiation between a 3-year-old dry heifer and then an in-calf heifer and then the milch cow as well. So they're really, really, really important. As you can see there, the milch cow has a value of 20 scruples for its first calf or 24 scruples for its third calf. And that milch cow could then probably produce calves for another few years, so that's why it's incredibly valuable. It's a known to be able to reproduce. It's not a dry cow, for example. Other pig animals that were included were the following. We have pigs, and we have portions of bacon being really are referred to quite a lot in terms of the fees that might be paying to somebody. In the sources, they really regularly refer to portions of bacon, and I'll show you an example of that later on. Sheep also are another important source, and don't forget, it's not just the animal products as well, but the fact that sheep grow and they have their wool that can be shorn and used and reused for woolen products. We also see that because sheep have horns, when they can make pins and combs and things like that out of the horns as well. Regularly in the sources, we see references to calf pens, pigsties, sheep pens. So for example, in the law text that I edited for my PhD, which focuses in on the consequences of burning down buildings on the farm, it specifically mentions the sheep pens, the calf pens, and the pigsties, and the compensation that needs to be paid for that. And if the animals are in those pens while they're burnt down, then double needs to be paid for the replacement of those animals. We also then have frequent references to oxen or horses being kept because they work the land, and then also smaller animals such as geese and hens, where they were kept for their eggs, and even bees as well. Now, bees themselves are the subject of their own specific law tract. It is known as Judgments on Bee Judgments, Bec Freha, which was edited by Fergus Kelly and Thomas Charles Edwards. So it's a dedicated law tract from the 7th century, focusing in on the consequences of the actions of bees, because bees can trespass on your land, and they are very concerned about this. So Fergus Kelly and Thomas Charles Edwards note in their edition that they draw attention to the fact that the bees themselves, because they will trespass, because you can't control a bee, okay? You can't control where they're going to go. You can't say, you can't cross that boundary. Bees don't recognize that fence as a boundary. What that farmer who owns the bees would do was he would pay what's known as a forepledge to his surrounding neighbours and say, I promise that because my bees will trespass on your land, I am going to give you something in return for their terrible actions. So for the first 3 years that a farmer has a beehive, he doesn't have to pay anything. He collects his honey as he goes. But in the 4th year and then in the 5th year, he would give each of the new swarms of the bees to each of his neighbours. And it's assumed that his neighbours would live, he would have 4 neighbours, one front, behind, and then one on either side of his farm. So there would be 4 swarms over the 4th year and the 5th year, and he would give a hive to each of those 4 neighbours. And that way they get to share in the benefits of the bees themselves. Now, as you know, it takes quite a lot of bees, an awful lot of work to make a very small amount of honey and beeswax. So, you know, it's quite an important product, but it's not a product that you're going to get a huge amount of. So if you have one farmer whose bees are going around and taking all the pollen from all of the flowers on his neighbouring farmer's land, and they're going, he's getting a load of pollen and he's getting a load of honey out of my lovely apple trees or my lovely fruit trees. That's not fair. And that's actually what the point of the Law Tract is about, is to help your neighbours prosper. Brehon laws weren't about equality, but they were about fairness. There's a misconception that Brehon laws, that everything was more equal in the Brehon laws in the medieval period. That's absolutely not true. It was a hierarchical, patriarchal society. But it did have an element of fairness underpinning a lot of it. That if you have bees, you should share the swarms. If you commit a crime, you should pay compensation for that, according to people's status, of course. But there is a certain element of fairness underpinning it, and that's what actually underpins this law tract on bee judgments. Now, bees weren't the only animals that could commit a crime, or in fact that were regulated. We know from the Brehon laws, and as I said, the Brehon laws are from the 7th century and the 8th century. One collection is known as the Seanachas Mar, the Great Collection, and this is part of the bee judgments are part of this Great Collection. Liam Branagh, a scholar from Dublin, has dated them to in or around the second half of the 7th century, and given very strong arguments for that. But some of the other law texts that are in that collection are regulations for cats, regulations for dogs, and also regulations for neighbourhoods. And this is again edited by Thomas Charles Edwards. Most of that tract is concerned with things like fencing, boundary issues and trespass. One of the unusual things about it is compensation doesn't happen according to the status as it would in most other law tracts. It's actually about the consequences of the animals who have trespassed on your land. So in this case, a noble would receive the same as a commoner in terms of compensation if a bunch of errant cows decided to break the fence and trample maybe on your crops. I think one of my favourite parts, though, of the little nuances in this law is it refers to hens. Now, hens could, when they get out, they go everywhere, they don't care, and also they don't care if they leave a mess anywhere. And so there is a fine for the damage by hens done. It's 3 loaves if they damage the inside of the house. It's half a scruple if they do it in the courtyard, and half a bushel of grain for damage outside. However, there's a caveat as well, which I quite enjoy. And if the hens are nasty with an ingrained viciousness in them, the fine is raised so that they might actually be hooded or even subject to the debt of human trespass. So if you've got a vicious hen, be warned, if they break out, you're paying for them. We've been talking about animals so far, but we should also talk about grain. Now, I'm only going to talk a little bit about this, it's highlights only. Fergus Kelly in the Early Irish Farming has a huge section on this. I have the book with me, so if anybody wants to see it later on, please do come up to me. So I'm really just going to give a very cliff notes based on what he has said. But one of the things that we should note is that grains are also ranked according to their value. There's a law tract called Brehead Dain Kecht, or the Judgments of Dain Kecht, who was a mythological figure from the Tuatha Dé Danann. Now, this text was edited by Daniel A. Binchy that I mentioned earlier on again, and there's grains listed in order of importance, including bread wheat, rye, spelt, 2-row barley, emmer wheat, 6-row barley, and then the common oat. bread wheat itself is actually very hard to grow in Ireland, so it was quite valuable, because if you manage to actually successfully grow bread wheat, you've got lovely bread that you can make as a result of it. More often than not, people are going to be growing the barley and the rye, which does indeed create lovely bread, but it's not as, because there's less gluten in it or no gluten in it, the bread is a bit more dense than the wheat. In terms of the oats, the common oat isn't as valuable as barley. For example, a bushel of barley is only worth about 2 oats, according to Kelly. But it's really important because, you know, it's so much easier to grow. You can feed lots of animals with it, but you can also feed yourself. And one of the little examples that we have is from a paper that was written by Francis McLaren, McMonk, and my colleague Regina Sexton. And it's the archaeological evidence that comes from an archaeological site famous in Cork, known as Leslie 1 and Leslie 2, adjoining Ringforts. Now, these in particular were dated in around the 7th century. They had a number of structures, and I quite like them because they got burnt down, and they were quite useful for me when I was looking at my PhD research. For us, though, one of the interesting things that we have is that there was a couple of pieces that survived. They were organic. They thought that it might be pottery, but it turns out that they weren't. What Francis McLaren, McMonk and Regina Sexton looked at was the chemical analysis of the remains, and they discovered that they were most likely made from a mixture of whey water and oats. So it looks like they were baked on a hot stone for approximately 30 seconds and then were toasted on a fire to ensure that all the moisture was removed from them. So for many, many years they thought that it had been pottery, but it turns out what they had was evidence for biscuits. My particular, because I have quite a fondness for biscuits, I was quite taken with this. These, because they were dried out, would have lasted a really long time. So, you know, when you have your whey water and you have your oats, you can make them up. You can make them up in batch and store them. And most luckily for us, because the building burnt down, these biscuits didn't get to decay or even be eaten, so that we have plenty of sources. You know, we have this surviving evidence for them today. I couldn't not mention drinks. Mead was really, really popular. Beer was the most popular in terms of drink. And then also we have wine. Wine was imported into medieval Ireland, so it was. We know from a law text called Murbrecha, or sea judgments, that wine was could be one of the things that was salvaged. Charlene Eska has recently brought out an edition of that text, which is really fantastic. For ourselves as well, I just want to bring back to statuses. I mentioned that we'd have different statuses and in comparison. This one here is the farmer here on the left, the Boara, and then we have the noble on the right. And we can see differences between them in terms of the food that they are allowed to have. So, for example, the Boar is entitled to butter on the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, and 9th and 10th days of his sick maintenance, and fresh onions or salted for his condiments. The noble, in comparison, is entitled to butter and salted meat on the 2nd, 3rd, 5th, 9th, and 10th days and Sundays of sick maintenance. So what we have here is a method of using food for differentiation. I'm going to come back to that in a second. But the point I'm trying to make here is that status and connections between people, food could be used to differentiate it. And none is more visible than with children. And this is through the process of fosterage. Boys and girls from the age of 7 could go on fosterage, so they'd go and live with another family, learn the skills they needed to, but they had to always be fed and clothed and catered for according to their status. And one of the things that we can see is this food being used as a way that they could be catered for. Now, Bronagh Connell has an article where she describes the foods that they are entitled to. For the porridge that the children would have to eat, we have the king's children would get milky porridge with honey as flavourings. The noble's children would get milky porridge again, but with butter, fresh butter. Whereas the commoner's children would get porridge made with water and probably salted butter, or just a little bit of maybe of whey butter with it. So 3 different ways of eating your porridge, defining your status as a child. Another use of food that we have in our ways that we can see is through a process of food and status, is through a process called clientship. And clientship is a way of, if you are wealthy, you could extend a loan known as a fief to another person, and you would give them basically, depending on how much they can repay, you would give them a loan of cows and land, or maybe some tools as well. And in return, they would have to pay you a food rent every year. Part of the food rent was always listed as summer food and winter food. So you'd have to collect the food and pay it back for, basically, it's your loan repayment. And so we have an example of this being listed in the law tracts on Con Agalna. It's a clientship tract, so it is. And it lists that summer food is mostly consisting of dairy food, basically sometimes referred to as Bombia white foods, so anything made of milk. So cheese, curds, whey, butter, that kind of thing. Winter food then tended to be grains that would have to be paid, and then also pieces of meat. So for example, a fletch of bacon was one of the things that would be paid for in the foods as well. If you were sick, you were brought away on what was known as sick maintenance. That's what I was referring to there a few seconds ago. Sick maintenance was a way of caring for a person who had been injured in a neutral party's house. They had to be given food and catered for as well, according to their status. Now, with this, there's a law tract called Brethir Crowliga, Judgments on Bloodline, and it actually specifies that there is foods that are banned to give to a sick person. These foods include seafood, mostly probably salty, honey and horse meat. You cannot give them to it. And if a doctor specifically says that you cannot give these foods to a sick person, and you do, you will be fined. Or if the doctor forgot to tell you not to give these foods to a sick person and they get sicker, the doctor could be fined. Finally, there is one person I would like to talk about, and this is a person whose literal status is derived from food. And this is a person known as a hospitaller, or a brigu in Irish. This was a really high status option, so it was, and it was for a person who would provide hospitality to any visitors. Generosity of food and care was at the core of the job. This person was not a noble, but had gained a huge amount of land, a huge amount of animals, and could therefore cater for any visitors. And so they were able to gain the equivalent status of the lowest level of nobility through their generosity with food. Now, Garmod Macron was a scholar that looked at this particular job role, and he noted that there's actually several different levels of status were associated with this hospitaller. So the minimum was that they had to have 100 head of animals to be able to cater for the amount of animals that are hospitality that was required. The next person in status had to have 200 head of animals, and it got higher and higher as the status went up. Now, as Garrod MacNone notes, a brigu could never turn away a person from his door and was required to have food at all times to feed his guests. And because he was feeding his guests at all times, that's where he got his high status. But if he failed to feed them, if he turned them away, he would lose his status then as a result. So it's a really nice way of showing that food not just underpins the status, as we see with the kind of rents that people have to pay, but it also can actually define a person's status in medieval Ireland by being this super host in particular. I've one final piece that I want to show you just about how food can influence some of the words that we have in medieval Irish, and it actually is to do with the days of the week. Now, we know our days of the week in Irish are, for Wednesday it's Céadín, Thursday it's Déardín, and Friday it's Ina. In actual fact, these refer to fasting or lack of food as well, so we're showing a network of how Christianity has come into medieval Ireland and affected our understanding, our names of the week. So Céadín can be divided up into Céad, the word first, and then Ín, fast, and then Ina is fast, or Ina didn't, last fast. And then we have, so Wednesday is our first fast, Friday is our last fast, and we know this as well. We still have, sometimes fish on Fridays, no meat whatsoever. But then we have Thursday, Déardín. And if you break down the etymology of that word, it actually breaks down to the day in between two fasts. Day idir da'in. So we can see even in small little ways, food can have influences that we still don't see today, that we don't necessarily recognise. I'm going to leave it there. Thank you very, very much for listening to me, and if you have any questions at all, please don't hesitate to ask. Thank you.
So there was references already to white cattle, black cattle, like black hair cattle. There's also references to long hair and short hair cattle as well. I don't think there's a hierarchy there in terms of the different breeds. But in the stories, any cattle that are kind of that have this kind of white red ears are usually associated with mythological figures, so they're particularly prized. Now that's in the stories, not so much in the reality, but there is references. Then it's about the wealth is being defined by the amount of cattle that a person has, or the amount of cattle that they can gift as a fief, for example, to a client, a noble, to another person, for example. But I don't think there is a hierarchy within the kind of various breeds of cattle. But there is references definitely to the different long hair, short hair, and then the colour of the coats as well. Move the person there, and then. I can't, no.
Just shout out the question. Thank you for a very interesting talk. Are there foods that are everyday now that we consider unfit for people to eat then, or vice versa? You mentioned horse meat, which I suppose that would be
So I suppose there's food that we would think of as fairly common that actually kind of come in with the Normans. Goats aren't mentioned a huge amount, and although there is references occasionally to goat milk. The rabbits come in post 1200 as well. They're not very, very common. Hold on a second. I know I wrote something else down in one of my footnotes. How often they ate horse meat, I don't know, but it's specified. Sometimes the rules are there because somebody did it once. And I should say as well that the laws are customary laws, not constitutions, so we can't say that they are covered every single part of every single county of Ireland. So hold on a second for now. Can I have that then? Ducks and doves, actually, there's they're not really mentioned pre-Normans, and certainly certain kind of yeah, that's kind of it. You know, there's certain ducks, doves. You know, they're all things that we kind of associate with post-Norman. Yeah.
Just let me see, is that working now? Okay.
Yeah.
The lead is a bit dodgy. Sorry, will I go here?
Yeah, probably go there.
Are there any references to peas and beans before the Normans?
Now, Sherry Peters, in her article in the Proceedings of the Royal Irish Academy journal from 2015 that was dedicated to food, she actually draws attention to, I think it's an excavation that was done by Finbar McCormack, if I'm remembering correctly. I know it's definitely, she mentions it in her article. I think there's evidence of peas, but beans not so much. Beans are definitely much more associated post 1200. So yeah, but I think there is now archaeological evidence for peas prior to 1200.
In terms of, what about seafood and shellfish and sort of fish?
So yeah, I was looking that up very briefly just before I started. The majority of the laws are focused on farming food, but there is references to freshwater fishing in particular. There seems to be less references to sea fishing or seafood, but that's probably because, and Ferris Kelly draws attention to this, the law tract on sea judgments that I mentioned, that's edited by Charlene Eska, that's a partial survival, so there could be that there was probably a big section in the sea judgments law tract that was talking about seafood and sea fishing in particular, but that doesn't survive to us, it's lost to time. But there definitely, there was references to fish weirs, salmon fishing, anything that's kind of freshwater fishing, there's more references to. Unfortunately, there's not a huge amount of references to sea fishing, although there is bits and there's the odd bit and pieces here, so that we know they definitely were. But in terms of actually surviving, we think, the sea judgments is missing that page with that, is unfortunately hasn't survived the test of time, but that most likely would have covered it.
I just want to test this. Is this actually working?
Yes.
You can hear.
Yes.
Okay. We'll try that one.
I was interested in early vegetables, thinking about pre-1200s. With you mentioned kale. Were there any other vegetables? Onions?
Onions, definitely,
and
yeah.
how similar would they be to what we recognise as those vegetables now?
And that's a good question. Definitely onions, herb gardens, definitely anything that's, a native plant is definitely there. That would have survived down. Wild garlic is referred to a good bit. In terms of how recognisable they are in comparison to the onions that we get in the supermarket today, I actually couldn't tell you. But they're definitely referred to. Leeks as well is another one that's a version of the leek, maybe a wild leek, is referred to as well. But things like potatoes are not a feature of medieval Ireland at all. They're an import. They're not part.
That's what I was thinking. I was surprised but I suppose they would have come from wild vegetables and maybe been sort of bred, we would expect.
Yeah.
There's all sorts of things like you said, wild eggs, wild parsnip, things like this, which over time would be bred to more resemble what we.
Absolutely, yeah.
Any others down the back, is it?
Coming back to the cattle, you mentioned oxen. Would that have been milk cows or would that have been bullocks used for that? Was there any
I think it's mostly bullocks that are used for that because they would have to have been quite strong. They would have been pulling a ploughshare. So yeah, I think it is bullocks that we're talking about. We only need a few. There's even a suggestion that, and if we go back actually, hold on there now, to this one, to the Boer, we can see that he would have had half a share in a plough. So quite possibly what we would have had is a couple of neighbours co-ploughing, so that they, or maybe that they would have 2 oxen and their neighbour has 2 oxen and they're pulling a plough, for example. So yeah, you don't need a huge amount of bullocks, but I think the oxen are most likely male.
Thank you for your a great talk.
Thank you.
I was just wondering, do we know how nutritionally complete the diet was? I know that would depend on your status, but is there any evidence from, say, skeletons that there was a particular sort of deficiencies running through? Probably rickets or.
Yes, so I'm going to talk in generalizations here, but I do know as an overall, for example, if there is famine or a lack of nutrients particularly, they will show up in the teeth. So some skeletons from this time period definitely would show evidence of that. So for example, particularly when the adult teeth are forming, if there is a famine or a nutritional deficiency, that can feature in a kind of a line in the teeth. I can't think of any examples off the top of my head, but that's just because I didn't go looking for them. But I definitely know it can appear. We definitely know from the annals that there is consistent plagues happening habitually, so the chances of someone going a lifetime without any plagues or without any kind of famine or a lack of nutrients certainly would have happened. The nutrient balance definitely is seasonal, so if you have a poor crop, for example, of fruits and berries in a particular year, then obviously those kind of water-soluble vitamins and minerals, what we would know as those water, them as now, they definitely would have suffered as a result of that. Certainly there is archaeological evidence for nutrients, kind of the impact of nutrients or lack of nutrients on the bones. We do know that is something that does happen. But someone like maybe Sullivan's publications, Finbar McCormack's publications, or there's another archaeologist that I used to work with, Yanni Gieber, who examines skeletal remains as well. They'd have a lot more information about the actual physicality showing up in the bones. But yeah, it would all depend on whether or not it's a good year for the crops or a bad year for the crops, on how much then would survive. But they would have always had as a staple their breads, because grain can be stored. They would have had their butters. Butters can be stored. The milking season is really, really long in Ireland, particularly in Cork. I think it starts 6 weeks earlier in Cork in comparison to everywhere else. So they would have had at the core milks, breads, and some meat, so overall fairly secure, if providing there's no famine, plague, and whatnot.
I'm going to just maybe ask for one more question, and then we are going to break for an interval, and you're going to stay with us for the whole of the afternoon, so there'll be loads of opportunities to come up and chat afterwards. So one more question from the lady at the end.
Great. Thank you. Fascinating talk.
Thanks very much.
I'm sure there's quite a lot of scholarship out there on the topic of food, kinship and marriage. But if you have anything maybe to offer us today on maybe did livestock play a role in let's say the exchange of women, where did livestock feature in kinship from this perspective?
Okay, that's a really interesting question. So if two families are, they have two children, son and daughter, who are going to get married, they would have a public betrothal or engagement, in which what's known as a bride price would be given to the daughter's father. And the daughter had a choice when this was known as a equivocal or a bride price. It could consist of animals. So, for example, sheep would have been a common one that would have been given from the groom's family to the bride's family. The father keeps a good portion of it. The daughter then keeps another portion of it. She had a choice whether or not she put it into the joint economy of the family with her husband to be, or whether or not she kept it separately. And it was a way, for example, for brides who could maybe do weaving in particular, who maybe did fine embroidery, things like that, that if they divorced subsequently, depending on how they had divided the joint economy of the household, she could retain most or all of her equivocal depending on the circumstances. Now there's nuances within that, but that's in a marriage of what's known a marriage of joint contribution, where you have the male and female children or grown adults. When they're getting married, they're of the same status, so they are. There's differing statuses then which would have had affected that, but if you're talking about the bride and groom of equal status, and it's a public marriage in front of everybody, that in the laws is where animals might, in particularly sheep, because of the wool products that can be used by the bride, would have been part of the bride price that was handed over. Yeah.
Well. I think we could have stayed here for another half an hour talking. It was fantastic. Thank you so much. I really wanted to invite the other key person here this afternoon, Sonia Caldwell, to come and talk to you just for 5 minutes about her work. She has a fabulous display here, which you're going to have time to look at during the interval, but I think it's great if you can come and talk about what you're interested in, what you produce, and more importantly, I guess, the recent work you've done with the Rana National School and how that pertains really to the Ringfort and the people of medieval Ireland. Thank you, Simon.
Hey, Eve. Sorry, I was asked, I'm getting flashbacks having to do a video during COVID and speak about something you're passionate about for 3 minutes. So I will try to keep it to 5 minutes. So basically I got involved with the Ringfort Committee because mainly they were looking for somebody to go to Rana National School to do, to sort of introduce them to the concept of the Ringfort and what life might have been like. And I suppose my specialist area, as well as many things, is kind of craft. And so on one table over here we do have items made in the classroom. As you can imagine, doing any craft with 25 children is complicated. So anyway, we did our best, and they got a sort of hint of. I'll just actually show you one thing briefly, because it's worthy of a display on a human being. So this was made by the infants in a felting cloak. So yeah. So now I did sew it up. They didn't sew it up. But we didn't have a mannequin here to display it. But I suppose then on a broader subject, which I suppose is the area, I'm sorry, that would just credit the Heritage Council Heritage in School scheme for it. They fund projects all around the country. There's a whole panel, anyone involved in schools or even of children, grandchildren, there's a whole panel of people all around Ireland who work on that scheme, and it's all available to see on their website. But I suppose on a broader scale, and tying with the talk as well, so really, I mean, everybody living around that time, everything they made and used was made within a very small radius of where they lived. They didn't even have transport. Going somewhere like the distance of Skibbereen would have been a big deal. Obviously, living this close to the sea would have been massively beneficial, and I'm sure there was an element of trading. But the vast amount, and tying completely in with food, it's really hard to get into the craft element of things without thinking of food. So I suppose one of the main craft areas of interest is basketry. And I mean, people automatically think of willow baskets. I don't know, I don't know a lot of historical information. I was saying to somebody I did pick a bit of just what's called goat willow. Whether they cultivated willow for making baskets, down there under the artist's easel is a creel, which would be an Irish creel. I mean, they don't even know the edge of the Ringfort, so it's all complete speculation. But I would pretty much guess, I mean, if they were living in an agricultural way, you know, they were gathering seaweed for fertilising. And then on the table, there's a lot of kind of smaller baskets. So baskets are also made by coiling, by doing other sort of small, what's called a twining technique. Again, I don't know what skills there were. The trouble about basketry, and again, I have no training in archaeology, but I do know that the trouble about all the crafts you see on this table is that archaeologically wise, they're gone. Put anything on the table in the ground, within 2 years it's gone. It's all made from organic materials. So they're also very temporary. So things would have been made continuously. So up there you have a bit of sugan rope, which you don't need to go back to medieval times. That was made in Ireland up until within people's living memories, but it's all just kind of gone over a very short period of time. So it's really about, I suppose my interest as well is just about the materials, which I said are largely organic, they're largely plant-based. You've got your common field rush, which is, I'll kind of pull out as a bundle, and that bundle there. Common field rush would have been used for loads of things. They dipped it in tallow and made little candles from it. We did that with the kids. And you got straw, so they would have been growing grain. So we've got straw there as well, and obviously the sugan rope is made from straw. And then even in the green leaves there, they're what people commonly know as bulrush. I prefer to call it reed mace because there's confusion over the names. I mean, I don't know what they would have gathered. I mean, but then, and then I suppose briefly then on the table as well. So I've just tried to put a little display in the basket, some of which are made by me and some of which are made by the kids. And they're so little displays of food. So it's another kind of area of kind of immense interest for me, is just kind of wild food and gathering wild food and foraging, I suppose. I mean, I know from reading small bits, you often hear Viking settlements. Maybe there's been more archaeological digs done in places like Dublin. And you do hear they can see evidence of seeds from things like dock leaves and dock seeds, just to show exactly what wild foods were in diets. I would like to think certainly back then there was just a much richer, so I know what the talk was very focused on agriculture, and I suppose maybe I'm speculating the laws would have been focused on agriculture because I suppose when it's your property and your agriculture there's more laws. When it comes to gathering wild food there's probably less laws required. And if you think back then, you're not talking, I mean, there are laws. I read recently that apparently in Sweden you have a right to go into somebody else's property to pick a mushroom. Apparently that stands today. Correct me, somebody, if you know any better. So there would be sort of foraging regulations in place. But back then maybe there wouldn't have been, because, I mean, I can only guess the population was very small and wild areas were much greater. So and actually just on that note there, there's a deer skin there, which was just a recent local project we looked at doing. I would guess that they hunted as well as being agriculture. I've got a nod from the front. So hunting would have been, somebody mentioned shellfish. I mean, people think automatically about fishing, but I mean periwinkles, limpets. I mean, I know as the years went by, a lot of those foods were considered very peasant foods. Even scallops were considered like a peasant food. But I mean, to gather all these things, you need baskets, you need something to gather them. So craft and making things was an essential part of that. And obviously clothing, and I'm not even going to get into that. I will try, from a point of view of demonstrating, I mean, it's really, I'm probably just visualising myself more just hanging around the table and talking to anybody that wants to kind of talk about things. Obviously I can't talk to everybody at once, but we'll try and sort of stick to topics. I do have a couple of drop spindles and some flax. Whether they were using proper fancy constructed spinning wheels. I mean, if you look at this butter churn, I suppose as a piece of craft alone, so forget about the actual butter for a minute. To make a piece like that requires steaming wood, requires cutting down a fairly large tree, You know, as to the, I don't even, are there even studies? I mean, maybe you can, I'm sure somebody has studied the development of craft in Ireland. Again, you put a butter churn like that in the ground, and within a couple of decades it'll be gone. It'll completely have rotted away. So that's, I suppose, a large issue in archaeology. Yeah, so clothing, as I said, haven't even got into it, but I have flax. They would have grown flax, and obviously wool. We were talking about the sheep, and you've got the leather from the animals, and they would have had all those skills. They would not have been killing a cow and getting rid of the hide. They would have used everything, and they would have had the skills to know how to do them. So, yeah, brilliant, wonderful.
So we have loads of opportunity at the interval for people to chat to Sonia and Triona. Thank you both. Now, so the running order for the rest of the afternoon. First of all, you all need to get exercised, stand up, have a cup of tea, chat to your nearest neighbour. We will actually move the front seats back here because we want to create a space for anyone who feels like getting up to dance. I'm reliably told by our musicians that this happens regularly when they start playing, and I tried it out earlier myself today, and it can happen. So for those of you sitting in the front, we'll have ample space hopefully in the back, as well as moving the chairs a little bit from the front there, so bear with us. Now, before we break, I do want to actually recognise that during the interval we're going to have some real life butter making going on over here, and I believe we'll be able to sample it. Fantastic, thank you. And we also have a number of sponsors who really helped us put this together this afternoon. In particular, we mentioned Cork County Council and the Heritage Council, but we also have some individual sponsors. Are they here in the audience? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for the sponsorship you provided. And I also want to recognise the number of people who have helped contribute to the raffle prizes we're going to have this afternoon. It's absolutely mind-blowing to see how generous the businesses are here in this community, but also individuals. So I will flick through the slides very quickly, if I may. We've got foraging with Sonia for 2 people, which I think would be a wonderful prize for anyone to get. Breakfast, not in Tiffany, but in Ralph's for 4. A lovely voucher for Bush's Bar. Fabulous gin coming from Cape Clear Lavender. A new business opportunity has opened up there, and they're doing great work, including also, before I leave Cape Clear, there are 2 product prizes in there as well. A garden visit to Inishbeg for 4 people. I think the children can go free, but 4 adults. Delish have contributed a lovely voucher. Casey's, Siobhan and Dominic, we've lovely craft beer as well as a voucher to go with that. It's going to be honey only from you and Jacob because the honeycomb was sold out. Some heritage books and maps from the Yellow Door. Tom and Carl Henry have donated a lovely bouquet of flowers, a vase and some of their own honey. Although the law on honey now is opening up a whole number of questions in my mind, we must talk about that. Unprompted, Violette House and Skibbereen gave us a voucher. And Shebeen have given us some drink and a voucher, and I think that's it. And also Sonia has given us some of her lovely calendars and greeting cards. Thank you. They're there as well. So, is the hat going as well? So obviously somebody's thrown in a hat there as well for free, so that obviously is included in the raffle. Now, the job we have here is to encourage you all to buy the tickets. Have you won it? Is that your hat? And while you're doing all of that, we're going to have these lovely musicians playing for us. They're called the Ill Elbows. I think this is what it's about. They'll be playing for us, fabulous musicians. Teas and coffees over here. And Charlie Crowley, our financial controller on the Ringfort subcommittee, is going to be watching very carefully that tickets will be bought and selected for the winners. And they will close this afternoon by inviting Sheila, our chairperson, to say some closing remarks and maybe a look to the future of what we're planning. So that's it. You can get up and stretch your legs now. Thank you very much. ticket 116 to 120. Pink ticket 116 to 120. The name is in the back. Who's that? Patrick Burke. I don't believe it. Patrick Burke wins the first prize. First prize is a foraging afternoon for two with Sonia Caldwell. Well done. Woohoo! That's the one. Yeah. I rip it apart. Rip it apart. Okay. You can tell I've never done this before. The next ticket is 276 to 280. Pink. Name in the back. No name. 276 to 280. Woohoo! What's your name? Vincent O'Shea wins the second prize, which is Breakfast in Tiffany's or Ralph's for 4. Or you. Oh God. Okay. Next one. Oh my God, we have a run on the pink. Next ticket is 321 to 325. No name at the back. 321 to 325. Did you get this? 321 to 325. Fantastic. This is, what's that one now? You're getting a Bush's voucher. Very nice. Look at you. Okay. Pink. Pink again. It's 201 to 205. 201 to 205. Come on, 201 to 205. Pink ticket. Pink ticket. 201 to 205. Oh dear. What do we do now? Oh, we draw it again. Oh, we put it in that. Okay, we'll come back. Okay. It is a yellow ticket for a change. 81 to 85. And we have a name. S. Walsh. S. Walsh. 81 to 85. S. Walsh. Yoo-hoo! S. Walsh. And you are getting a free voucher for 4 to Inishbeg Estate. There you go. Well done. Next one is yellow 321 to 325, and we've got a name. It's Paula Connell. Paula Connolly. Yeah. And you're getting a voucher for Violet. Thank you so much. Thank you. Now here comes a big one. I wanted to win this myself because it's a voucher to go with the craft beer. Okay, so this prize is the West Cork Brewing Company selection of beer craft, as well as a voucher for Casey's. Thank you, Siobhan and Dominic. 246 to 250. It's a pink ticket. 246 to 250. 246 to 250. Oh!
Maya and Max.
Who is it?
Maya and Max.
Maya and Max. Oh, right. Too young. The next tickets are yellow, 111 to 115, and we have a name, S.O.
Siobhan has on.
Oh, is it Siobhan?
No, Siobhan. Oh, is that your friend? Is it Hannon? Is it? Oh, Hannon.
Oh, Hanlon?
Yes.
S. O'Hanlon? S. O'Hanlon, I don't know, it takes 4 people to read the writing here. Oh, there you go. And you're getting a lovely one actually from the She Bean with the voucher. Well done. Oh, excellent, thank you. Now we've got a yellow ticket, 266 to 270, and it's Michael... Hannah? Michael Hannah? Michael Hannah. Yellow ticket. Michael Hannah. Where is he? Aha! Well done, Michael. Woo! You're getting a great one. You're getting Cape Clear lavender product. Gin, enjoy. The next one is pink ticket 271 to 275, no name. 271 to 275, pink ticket. 271, 271, 275, 271 to 275. No, we'll hang on a second. Oh dear. Next one, and we have a name, good. Yellow ticket 196 to 200, and this is, what's that?
Gabrielle Marjorie.
Gabrielle Marjorie. Who's that? McGarvey.
Sorry.
You can see we can't read. Well done. Oh, excellent. Yellow 156 to 160, and it is Ger Rogers. Ger Rogers. Is there a Ger Rogers in the house? Geraldine. You know it is. Okay, can we were 2 lovely jars of honey from you and Jacobs. Avery, I wonder is he licensed to go onto other properties? I shouldn't say that. The next one is yellow 146 to 150, and it is Conor McGuinness. Conor McGuinness. Well done. And they're from Ballylynch Hives, Tom and Carlos. Yeah. Yellow 51 to 55, Stuart Musgrave. Senior, oh senior. So what are we giving Stuart Musgrave Senior? Yeah, fabulous bunch of beautiful flowers from Glebe Gardens. Wonderful, brilliant, we'll enjoy that. 286 to 290, yellow, and it is a Marie Cronin. Aha, there you go. A lovely selection of calendars and writing cards from Sonia. And finally, we have a lovely fresh bouquet of flowers and a vase. Yes, beautiful vase. And the box for the vase is over there as well, so they can use that. 61 to 65, and it is S. Walsh. Again, who's the lucky person? S. Walsh. Yep, listen. What star were you born under? A lucky one. Brilliant. Okay, are we clear? What about those? We've got those books. There was one person, one gift, and we didn't know who it was for. We still have nothing for these 2 gifts. We're going to go again, I think. 201 to 205, pink ticket. 201, 205, pink ticket for Dealish Garden voucher. Okay, we're going again. Too many, just one. Oh, the answer is the patient, Charlie, just one. Okay, it's a yellow ticket, no name, 466 to 470. Yellow ticket, 466 to 470. I don't believe it! Salafix, who's this for now? You again? Well done. You're going to Dealish. And last but not least, a contribution from the Yellow Door. We've got some lovely books here with maps, and we're going to draw again for that. Okay, last one. It's 326 to 330, pink ticket. 326 to 330, pink tickets. Well done. There you go. Some nice books there. Okay, that's it. So now, just before you all leave, I'd like to invite Sheila Broderick up to close the afternoon and give us a few words. Sheila, good for you. Over to you. Thank you.
Okay, folks, thanks for hanging on. I just want to say this committee has been together since 2021, and we've been working really, really hard to try and find out what it is. It's known as a Ringfort, as a recorded monument, but actually people who are experts in the field believe it might be something else. We've had 2 geophysical surveys done, an archaeological impact statement site survey done. This year we were very unfortunate. We didn't get the funding that we wanted to secure a dig. So our main focus for next year is going to be to get a dig come hell or high water. The challenge is to get the funding for that. The second thing that we need to do is, once we know what it is to put in place an interpretation plan and a conservation plan. So this is a long-term project, and your support is really, really necessary for this, and thank you very much for your generosity today. thank you to everyone who donated prizes, and Nadine, who did such a great job in collecting. I just have to thank the very hard-working committee, and I don't know if you know them, but Chris Potter organised this event, so well done, Chris. It was a huge job, so thank you very much. Phoebe Olsen was your guide around the Ringfort, and I'm so sorry I wasn't there and everybody has to tell me what she said. Josephine Leonard and Sharon were in charge of the kitchen. Thank you very much. Colin Lydon made sure that we were all safe in the hall and did everything that we needed. Stuart Musgrave and Sam Birch look after the site and also all the technical setup. And last but not least is Charlie at the back, who is our very important treasurer, without whom we couldn't function. So please follow us on Facebook, Instagram. We have a YouTube account. We do updates in the community news. But we're ready to go again on the 2nd of October with another event, which is a talk by the former archaeologist, Early Christian Treasures, on October 2nd. It's on Eventbrite, so you can reserve your ticket. The last thing I have to say is that Kathleen Courtney has been working like a Trojan to make butter, and the butter is ready, so don't leave without having a taste of butter. And also our musicians, Ilan Elbows, are going to continue playing, I hope, just for a little while. So, you know, it's not often we get musicians of their calibre, so I really want to thank them for coming and for entertaining us so well. So, Gormina Magwib, and see you next year.